Well, hello, I'm Beth Schaefer. I'm the director of the Institute for Professional Development here at Metropolitan State University. Every month we offer free webinars, or I should say almost every month, we offer free webinars called the Expert Insights. Today we're running the webinar as a meeting with the hopes that I can work all the controls and have people participate in today's topic. We're doing a leadership toolbox topic called the Risk Register. Our leadership toolbox is part of a type of webinar where we take one particular tool and talk it all the way through and how you might want to use it in your organization. Let's see here. We do record, so note that. Today you can either throw messages or questions in the chat. There's a couple times where I may ask you to put answers in the chat to share. You can also, I think you have the power to unmute yourself, or if not, raise your hand. I usually have somebody helping moderate, and today it's just me working all the controls. So however you can get my attention is just fine with me. We're being low key. So with that, I think we will go ahead and get started. So my background that I bring to this topic is I do not have any certificates myself from Project Management Institute, but I have written curriculum on project management theory that they teach. I've been to lots of project management trainings. One of the advantages of running a training department is you get to go to a lot of trainings so that you can see what they're like, so that you know what to recommend to other people. So I've been to several different kinds of basic project management trainings, more advanced, and a one-day risk training. So I draw on all of that. I also have probably I think one of the better qualifiers, which is I use this in my job. So I apply the risk register to projects. I apply it to processes when I manage change. So I'll share how I do that today with all of you. And another piece I bring is I am at a supervisor level, which means that I have the ability on some projects where I have the team and I can set the tone, set the goal with their help, and we can manage it all within my team. But I also have stuff that kind of comes down from the top and is imposed on me to do. We call those mandates. We maybe call them other things too. But so I also have to figure out how to do things that I sometimes agree with and sometimes maybe disagree with. And so I think the risk register is helpful for doing that as well. Right. Oh, and I'm just going to do a quick check that you are seeing the slide deck. Uh-oh, no thumbs up. Thank you. Okay. All right. So we're ready to use the chat. So I'd like you to, you don't have to give me a definition of risk, but maybe give me a word or a phrase in the chat or a feeling that you have about risk. So when you hear risk, what's kind of a word or a phrase that pops up that you associate with risk? All right, potential danger, tolerance, negative outcomes times probability, roadblocks, caution, challenge. Yes, and I agree. That is where my brain goes as well. That oftentimes we associate risk with the potential for harm. That's the first place we're kind of conditioned to go to. But if we look more at a dictionary definition of risk, really, it's unplanned, it's unknown, and unintended in events. So a lot of the uns. So risk means it's maybe not black and white. There's some gray area there. You can't predict the future, so you don't know what's coming. And sometimes, and you've probably heard this phrase, risk leads to opportunity, or challenges lead to opportunity. So while we tend to automatically go to risk being a negative thing, it can be an opportunity for good things to happen. And in that case, risk is really actually pretty neutral. And risk is your level of uncertainty that you're willing to accept for future gain. So it's kind of on a sliding scale or continuum. And when we say your risk, it could be you as an individual. If you're making decisions about your personal life, it could be you as a team leader or a department leader. It could be you representing your organization. And maybe sometimes you find that you are more of a risk taker than maybe your organization is. Or maybe sometimes your organization has you take a risk and you are not that risky of a person. All of those things can play into that level of uncertainty. Oops. So with the risk register, we help figure out your level of uncertainty, and then by first identifying the risks, then it helps you determine, like, where is my level of uncertainty with this particular risk. Now, if you go out and Google risk register, you're going to get a lot of different examples. So there's no definitive risk register. If you look in the PMBOK for PMI, they probably say, like, this is the risk register that you use when doing projects. And if you are taking a class, you might have an academic theory or textbook that gives you a different definition. When you Google it, you get a lot of consultants who want to sell you risk management and sell you your how to handle risks. So they have their own charts, their own theories, they put their own spin. I am pretty much an agnostic when it comes to leadership tools. I say, use whatever works for you. So if you find that the webinar today interests you in risk registers, but maybe mine is too simplistic for you, feel free to go out and look for one that's got a lot more components to it. There are some pretty complicated, complex ones out there. So use what works, and maybe in different situations, you're going to use different levels of risk charts. So, ta-da, here is the risk register. So you've got a column for the risk that you identify. You've got the likelihood that that risk is going to happen. You've got the impact that that risk would have. And then you do some math and you come up with a risk rating. So the risk register itself clearly is pretty simplistic. But here's what it can all do for you. So first of all, I should give credit. So I've had two project manager instructors, Bill Wormager, who's now retired and cruising around the West in a RV, and Christine Moore, who's one of our current project manager trainers. This is kind of a hybrid of the way they taught me risk when I was in their classes. So I've kind of mushed their two things together. So the way that you can use a risk register, one is you can use it as a decision-making tool. So let's say for our department, we were recently deciding on, should we do electronic badges? And so we could take a look at different software programs that offered that, along with do nothing. I always remember to include the do nothing choice. And so we could take a look at what are the different risks involved with each of those decisions. So in some ways, it's an evaluation tool. And instead of just listing pros and cons and saying, oh, well, this software program has 10 cons, and this one only has 2 cons. So we must go with the 2-con one. The risk register adds that piece of evaluating, which means maybe the 10-con list has very minimal, easy to manage risks, and the 2-con list has an epic fail risk on it, in which case that would sway your decision to avoid the one that has the fewer cons because they're bigger and more impactful. So it's a good evaluation tool. I also like to use it for making business cases. So we recently added a diversity, equity, and inclusion program to our department to add that training. And I presented a business case to the university on why I thought we should add it. And one of the things I included was a risk register, because I can't predict the future either. There's always a level of risk. And so what I wanted to demonstrate to my leaders is that I had given this decision lots of thought, and that I had given, thought to what if scenarios, what if this happens, and what if this happens? And then I think that helps build confidence in them investing in your decision, or it helps them say, like, not yet, or you got to address this before we make that decision. Of course, you use risk registers as part of project charters. So those of you with project management, before you start a project charter, you do a risk register. But I would say you maybe even want to do a pre-project charter. So let's say, do we even want to do this project? A risk register might help you with making that decision. I also think you can use a risk register when you are looking at process improvement. So if you have a process that's not working very well and you are like, do we want to make a change to this process? What happens if we make this change? What happens if we do nothing? And then also with mandates. So we talked about that earlier. So even when, as a leader, you don't have a choice, you have to do something, I think using the risk register to manage that still helps you do a better job of implementing whatever it is, because you can say, well, wow, here's what my department may have trouble with. Let's get out ahead of that. Or maybe you can go to your leaders and say, I'm going to need additional resources because when I do a risk evaluation, these are some things that might be happening. And so it doesn't mean you don't have to do the mandate. It just means that you can maybe have a smoother ride on the mandate. So like I said, the risk chart itself is pretty simple. The tricky part is taking the time to identify all the risks. So I thought that would be the piece that we should do together. So I am going to, this time, put a situation, I think, into the chat. So that as we move forward, you've got that to reference. All right. So here's our application situation. You are a park and rec manager, and you've decided for the city of Champlin, which is where I happen to live, and you've decided to add a bags or cornhole league, depending on, what you call it, for adults. And this league is going to offer through the Park and Rec for people who are 21 years of age or older. They can sign up as a 2-person team and play in a bags league that will include playoffs, along with an opportunity to purchase food and drinks, including adult beverages, at the city park from the city-sponsored concession stand. So this is the idea that is going to go into place, and we are going to walk through the steps of using the risk register. So step 1 is fairly obvious, is we're going to generate a list of risks. So for instance, there could be rainouts. No one signs up for the league. You have to figure out how to pay for the equipment. Maybe the equipment price tag is pretty high, so you got to figure that out. And this one didn't exist. So I am a member of the Champlain Park and Rec Bags League, and we start tonight. That's why this is on my mind. And for me, Bags League is the unofficial start to summer. If you live in Minnesota, everybody kind of has their own unofficial start to summer. For me, it's Bag Leagues. So when the league started 5 years ago, there were lots of seasonal workers around to help with setup and takedown of the boards. Now that's a new risk that didn't exist, which also brings up another way you could use your risk register is if this is something that happens, this process or this event happens, you can pull your risk register out and take a look and update it and then see like, oh, do we have more things that we need to address? Right. I am going to now share, I think, a different document. All right. And then let me check in with you guys. Can you see the risk chart ready for us to fill in? Great. All right. Okay. So if you are the Champlain Park and Rec manager, you can put in chat, or you can, I think you can unmute yourself. It's hard for me to see all of you as participants here. So you can try raising your hand, but what are some risks that you might have to address? Okay, Julie, I think you can talk.
Okay. I would say everything that's involved with the alcoholic beverages, whether it's carding people to make sure they're 21, people bringing in their own alcohol, because it seems like we want people to buy it from the city-owned concession. I would also say, policing, hopefully that people aren't getting crazy and just focusing on the bags, but if there's an issue with the drinking and you have to deal with that. So, do you need a security guard or some sort of, police presence because there's alcohol involved?
Thank you, Julie.
Yeah.
I'm gonna put down, notice behavior from being overserved. Now you kind of moved into solution. I'm going to stick to problem. Okay.
Okay.
All right. Others?
I would say money. Who gets the till? Where does the till come from? That's part of that setup piece of setting up the concession stand. That can always be a challenge too.
All right. Other folks? And again, you can put things in chat. So we have equipment failure. So what if the bags start leaking beans? What if the boards fall apart? There's not a ton of equipment in bags, but yes, we want to keep an eye on equipment failure. All right. Other risks that we're looking at? Okay, so what do you notice so far? If I can kind of get most of them on the screen for you, what do you notice that's kind of common about the risks that we've listed so far? And you, again, put it in chat, or you can, I think you can unmute yourself, but I can, if you raise your hand, I think I can unmute you as well. And I started you on this path, so it's kind of a trick question. So what we've listed so far are anticipation of the bad things that can happen. And that is, again, part of how we kind of think about risk, right? What are the negative things that can happen? So when you're doing a risk register list, one of my success tips is that when you've listed a bunch of things like we have, you then actually make a concerted effort to think about what are some positive outcomes. So what if we launch bag leagues and it becomes wildly successful? What are some risks that we might have to handle based on positive success?
Too many people show up.
Yeah, so we have too many people. So we were hoping to get 16 teams, and we actually have enough people for 32 teams. So now what? Okay, what other things might happen because of a better than anticipated response?
The playoffs become complex. I mean, if you have 8 teams, it's pretty easy to do a playoff thing. But if you have 40 teams,
all right. And the ad did guarantee everyone to be a part of the playoffs. So yeah, now we've created kind of a complex playoff situation. Good.
What about spectators? Too many people want to come watch?
So maybe we didn't even plan for spectators. So now we have too many. We have spectators in general. We're like, oh, people want to come watch this. Okay. We don't even have stands. All right, good. Well, in the interest of time, oh, sorry, somebody go ahead.
You just need more food and beverage. So maybe the city concession can't handle it. So you need to organize food trucks.
Oh, no, just stop there. So we sell out is actually how I had listed it. So we sell out of food and beverage. So having better than anticipated response, it's like, oh, great. And there's more, and you get the idea. We're limited on time, but you get the idea of how to ask yourself or your team questions to elicit, like, what if this is wildly successful? Then what could happen? So that's success tip number 1 for your list. Let's move on to success tip number 2. I am and this is how my brain works, and maybe people who sign up for the risk register webinar, their brain works the same way. I tend to be a very logistics person, task orientated person. So when I'm doing a risk register, and so far, if you look at the things on our list, for the most part, here's one kind of behavior thing, but most of these are logistic situations. So when it comes to getting a good risk register, success tip number 2 is to think beyond functional logistics. So here are some questions I'm going to ask. And again, we might have to go a little more quickly, but one of the questions you can ask, and by the way, I will give you a slide when we're done that summarizes all of these success tips. So you can wait for the screenshot. So one of the things you can ask yourself, or the people who are helping you put this list together, what are some of the social risks? So in other words, when you think about this Bags League and the group dynamics, and people interactions, what are some risks that we might need to be ready for?
Not sure how likely it is, but how about injuries?
All right, so people might get injured. Oops. This one's maybe, unfortunately, more likely. So what if there's disputes between teams? So instead of having a fun time playing, people are busy arguing about the rules and arguing about the points. And one of the social behaviors, I think, was the behavior on, that was another one on my list, the behavior you might encounter for being overserved. And these are tougher. Yeah, Julie, you're not. Julie says one of her challenges is she tends to include solutions. And that is, I am the same way. So that's why I'm encouraging you not to at this point, and you'll see why. We'll circle back to solutions, so don't worry. One of the things maybe is the park, it's in the middle of a neighborhood. So maybe one of the social dynamics is when we think about the neighborhood, are they too loud and rowdy for the neighbors who are in the area? So that might be something that we have to look out for. All right, another question to get us to think beyond functional logistics are, what might and let me say, so if we're in the workplace and we're thinking about social risks, we might be thinking about like things like, oh, in order for my team to execute this, we're going to have to work with this team over here. That team over there is missing 2 or 3 people right now. And so that may slow down our process. So that's a social logistic. Or we got to work with an external entity, and that means that we're going to have to do more collaboration, more meetings. So we got to make sure and again, you can hear me do solutions because I'm giving examples, but we're going to have to make maybe more time for that. So those are some examples of workplace social interactions to consider. So the next one is emotions. So sometimes when we're making, usually risk charts, when we're talking about changing projects, changing process, change management in general, their emotions can come along with these things. So think about what kind of emotions or feelings might pose a risk.
I would say apathy. So you have this whole structure where people are participating and getting to the playoffs, and then people just don't show up, and it screws everything up and messes up your structure with, making that commitment to the league.
Yes, and actually, as an experienced player, I can tell you, you don't have to wait for playoffs. That you have teams who sign up and then they never show, and people arrive expecting to play a game of bags, and there's no one there for them to play. So that is, and then you feel bad and you feel disappointed. So that is that's a reality of the bags league for sure. Okay, other emotions. I know this is tougher. The emotion stuff is tougher, but it's just a good way to make sure you hit on all the risks.
Well, the opposite, hyper competitive to almost anger, when people take their bags seriously, maybe too seriously for a summer park and rec league.
Yes. So yes, people get mad when they lose. And this is along with that is so people feel that things are unfair. Now, this is one that I think you should almost always have on your risk list, that keeping an eye out almost, every time at work, how often do you hear people say that they feel that something is unfair? So that's a good emotion to have on your radar. All right. Last call for emotions. That was you guys did well with the emotions. You hit all the pre-examples that I had ready to roll. So all right. And look, we're doing so well. I ran out of there we go, room. All right. Then another question that I think you can ask yourself to get away from purely, this is somewhat functional, but a little different way, is what are the supporting risks? So what I mean by that is often whatever you're making a decision on or whatever you're figuring risks on seldom appears in a vacuum. So you want to look beyond the bigger picture. So in our example for Bags League, the cornhole game is not the only thing that's happening in the park and rec that summer. And it's not even the only thing that's happening at that park that night. So when we think about the Bags League being a part of a larger park and rec system or part of a larger park and rec evening, what are some risks that might bring? So I'll get you started. So one may be there's no place to play. So we want to start this bag leagues, but we're kind of out of park space. There's all these other leagues already going on. So where are they going to play? Yes, Julie says parking, right? So do we have enough parking spaces if we're bringing a ton of people together? And then if not, you know, people are parking on the neighborhood streets. So I'll just toss out a few more. Maybe there's nowhere to store the equipment. So you have limited storage. You've got now these, 16 giant boards. Where do they go? How are we going to haul them around? Do we have to, what are we going to invest? What are we doing with that? So, and we already talked about, if we have too many things going on, do we have enough workers to support not just the bags, but all the activities? So it's good to make sure you take a moment to assess as being part of a system. So here are the success tips for generating a risk list. So we went through what are the risks associated with success beyond anticipation. So think about the positive, an overwhelming positive response, and then what might that bring? Think beyond functional logistics. What are the social group dynamics risks? What are some emotional risks? What are some supporting risks, meaning in relation to the bigger picture or the system? We didn't do this one because I ran out of space, but normally at this point, if it's me or if it's my team, I might say, okay, we've got a good list. Let's think of 5 more. So this is part of brainstorming. Brainstorming is about pushing yourself or your group to get as many answers. Oftentimes the ones at the end are some of the best ones, the most nuanced ones. So one of the things you can do when you think you're done is to say 5 more. And then as you can see, I've been saying all along that I think it's helpful to seek input from others. People's getting a wide variety of perspectives is always a good way to get a complete risk list. I don't know, do any of you, if you have experience doing risk lists, or as we've been talking about it, do any of you have some good questions you want to throw in the chat to say, I would add this question to the success list? I know it takes a while to type, so if you think of one, go ahead and add it in. Otherwise, we will keep moving along. All right, so we've generated our risk list, and now the next thing we want to do is rate the likelihood and impact of those things happening. And this is another opportunity for input. So if you've done the risk list on your own, you can still at this point take it to others and say, okay, you know, what do we think the likelihood and impact of these things happening? And let me see if I can get my list back up. And this is, I usually do these things at the same time. You could do all the likelihoods and then all the impacts. But like I said, I usually do them at the same time. So, and I wouldn't spend a ton of time on this, being too analytical. I don't know, that's where you want to put your time and energy on a risk list. And you can pick your scale. If your organization already has a scale that you use, I would go with that. Some people say 1 to 4 because not having a neutral number and forcing you to pick is helpful. Some people say, no, use 1 to 5 because you want people to have a neutral space to land. So it's up to you. Again, I think the thinking process is more important than the technique sometimes. So we're going to use a 1 to 5 scale. And you would simply say, you know, what's the likelihood of a rain out? Well, it's Minnesota in the summertime, probably 50-50. And the impact is, well, on any night it rain. Oh, sorry. 1 is next to no likelihood of happening. 5 is very likely. And impact, 1 is very minimal impact. 5 is really big impact. Maybe epic fail impact. So on this case, on any given night that it rains, it's a huge impact because you're not going to play. Oops. Then no one signs up. Well, the likelihood of that happening is pretty low because it's already part of a larger system of signups. So that probably isn't going to happen. If it did, it would be a 5 though, because obviously the league wouldn't run. Price of equipment. The likelihood of the equipment being too expensive is pretty low because it's beanbags and, you know, boards. But the impact of not having equipment would be pretty high. No workers for takedown or setup. Now, the likelihood of this happening in the current climate is pretty high. It could even be a 5. And the impact would be pretty high as well. So we'd want to be taking a look at that. Handling the likelihood that people we have trouble with the alcohol situation. People are under 21, even though they're supposed to be 21 to play, bringing in their own alcohol. This could be pretty high when it comes to alcohol, and the impact would be pretty serious. Serving underage minors is a big deal. Breaking the law, and then bringing in your own alcohol would hurt sales. That would maybe be, financially. So anyway, you would continue through your list with, solo or with your team, putting numbers. And then the next step is simply figuring out your final rating. And you take the 2 columns, add them together. 3 plus 5 is 8. It gives us a 4 rating. This is 5 plus 2 is 7. That gives us a 3.5. This is, again, a 3.5. 9, this is a 4.5. 9, that's a 4.5. Now, if you are doing this on an Excel spreadsheet, of course, this would add up on its own. So that is another option. All right, so we've rated our likelihood and impact. Again, it generates some good conversation, but I don't think you want to spend all day arguing if something should be a 2 or a 3. Try to facilitate that going pretty quickly. Because the next step, the 3, do the math and note the high numbers. This is actually where we want to be spending our time and energy. So if something has a 5, that means it's really likely to happen and the impact is going to be pretty high. So we want to be looking at the 5s. If I had a 5 on my risk plan, I would probably be taking action sooner rather than later. 4, it's pretty likely it's going to happen, and it's quite likely it's going to have an impact. If I didn't have a lot of 5s, then I might also be taking action on my 4s, but I would for sure have some written contingency plans ready to go for my 4s. 3, 50-50, it's going to happen, 50-50. If I have a 3, I may be having this in my head where I'm thinking about, like, what am I going to do if this happens, and maybe have that in the back of my head, but I don't know that I'm writing anything down at this point. I don't know that I'm sounding any alarms outside of my team, but I might say to some of my team members, if this happens, I'd like you to have a plan ready to go. So maybe I delegate off the 3 to somebody else on my team. And again, it's a sliding continuum. If I didn't have any 5s and very few 4s, then I might, write down some actions for some 3s. 2, not likely to happen, low impact. I'm probably taking a wait and see with the 2s. And a 1, I might just ignore that one altogether. And so, Julie, earlier when you were moving to solution, this is why I would be like, maybe don't go to solution yet, because depending on the final rating, you maybe don't even need to think about a solution to that. It maybe doesn't even rate high enough for something to really worry about. So that's one of the reasons why I want to stay away from solution. So then now that we have our ratings in place, we are ready to manage. And now you see, this is actually the complete risk register where the plan column comes into place. And again, when I do risk registers, I don't have this column visible during brainstorming, because as we've shown, people make the assumption that if it goes on the risk column, then they're going to have to come up with a plan for it. So maybe some people are like, oh, I don't want to have to deal with that, or if I bring it up, I'm going to get that assigned to me. So and we don't want them and again, we don't want to worry about the planning at this point, because maybe with the rating we don't ever have to have the plan. So I leave the plan off. It helps me as I tend to be a solution jumper as well, so it helps me not worry about the plan. But it also helps people focus on brainstorming rather than working towards solution. And this can vary to how you manage risk, depending on, is this a high profile project for my organization and the risk on the project itself is really high? Or is this a low level internal process improvement that we are trying to make something better? And if it doesn't go all that great, nobody's going to really know except us. So those kind of things also play a role. Again, things are on kind of a sliding continuum, depending on it's situational. So right, just quick check on my notes there. All right. So now we're ready to assign some planning to our risks. This is another area where there are lots of theories, and you can Google, risk management, risk responses, and you can find a bunch of different set of theories or a bunch of set of options. So I am choosing to use avoid, control, assume, and transfer. It doesn't matter, I don't think, which ones you use, as long as you make sure that you are defining them for who's ever helping you make the plans. So if you use the word avoid, don't assume that everybody is thinking avoid means the same thing. So however you want to, whatever set of options you use and whatever set of vocabulary you use, just make sure you're defining it. So when I move forward with our risk register, when I say avoid, that means we are going to use an approach that we are going to sidestep that risk altogether. We're going to do action up front to handle it right off the top. We're going to do a different path and not even go down the path. So it's a 5, and we want to avoid having it happen. Control, that means we're taking steps to reduce that risk. So these might be the things in the 5 category, the 4, maybe some 3.5s. And the way, these are just some examples of actions that you can take to reduce risk. So we could develop policies, procedures, and processes. We could make a purchase of new equipment, or maybe we're purchasing a new role. We're investing some money. Maybe we're building, in the case of our example, maybe we're going to build a new equipment shed. Giving more time. So maybe saying, wow, we can do this, but instead of rolling it out 4 weeks from now, we need to roll it out 12 weeks from now. There's a lot more other ways that you can control risk, but those give you some examples to think about what control means. Assume means, in this, for this set of ratings, you're going to accept the risk and proceed. So noted, and on we go. And this is maybe what you do with some of the 3s, the 2s, the 1s. You're like, yep, I see it, onward. And then transfer is we're going to move that risk so it's somebody else's risk and not our risk. So here's an example of those with our Bags League. So people are upset about prizes being awarded to winning teams. And I will say, this did happen. So the likelihood of this happening was high. The impact was high. It had a 5. We wanted a plan, and we're going to use avoid. So our plan for this is we're not going to give out prizes. And that way it will downplay the competitive aspect of bags and promote the fun. Rainouts. So we talked before, likelihood 50-50, impact is big, gives us a 4 and an average. So we're going to control this. We're going to provide a bad weather hotline to call, and we're going to build in rainout days on the schedule so people aren't caught off guard if their night gets rained out, and we'll just bump it down a day. Now, again, this is part of because bags is part of a larger system, this is a pretty easy control to put in place because we've used it before and found success. Don't rule out, writing the tailcoats of something else that works well. So no one signs up. This was a pretty low likelihood. The impact would have been high. It gave us a 3. So we're going to assume this. We're going to say, okay, we've noted if this happens, we'll cancel the season and refund the money. But that's again, let's move on. Let's not spend too much time worrying about it. The neighbors find it too loud. Well, we're going to assume the likelihood of this happening is low, and we're going to assume we're not going to get a lot of complaints from the neighbors because the park is used for other things. They live on the edge of the park. This is nothing new. So again, we're going to just assume this risk. We're going to wait and see. And if during the course of the season there's complaints, then next year we'll have a better risk plan to deal with that. But let's just press on. And then we had this one on our brainstorm list, bodily harm to participants. I said due to board construction. So maybe there was a piece sticking out and somebody tripped on it, or maybe they got a splinter and got, had to go get a tetanus shot. The likelihood of this happening is pretty low. When you think it on a continuum of other sports, there's a lot more way. The other sports are much more dangerous. But the impact could be fairly high if we had an upset citizen who wanted to sue us over the defective board. So it's a pretty low rating, but we're going to transfer this risk by having participants sign. I called it a no sue waiver. I think it has a more technical name than that, but anyway, that's true. So play at your own risk, basically. And now that's risk is no longer our problem because we've transferred it to somebody else. So when you are thinking about how to plan for that risk, this is another opportunity to involve other people. So whether or not they were involved in generating the risk list, you could still involve them in generating a plan. This helps bring your stakeholders along. It also helps build trust. So if there's some big change coming down the pike, by having people be a part of the planning process and having them see how much thought and consideration has gone into something, can maybe help you with that change management plan. And then also, when things come down the pike, and your leadership says, this is what we're going to do, and you're like, I'm not quite sure this is going to work. And sometimes I'm going to say this happens. If you're really good at running your department or your division, you're so good at handling things that maybe the people at the next level don't realize how much risk management you're doing. And so you make it look too easy. And so this is a good way to, if you're concerned about something, to take it to your leader and say, I have some concerns about what's going to happen, and here's what I think would help our department. We need more time, or we need more resources. Now, they may say, I don't think so. Then you can move forward. And again, you can say, we've been monitoring this risk and we're pretty sure that this is going to happen. And it would really be helpful if, and then you hope at that point that that maybe you get what you want. But if you don't, and then your prediction comes true because the risk plan was not, put into play, you didn't have the resources, you didn't have the ability to delay the project, whatever the reason is, you at least kind of have some kind of documentation around, saying, you don't want to necessarily say to your boss, I told you so. But you could say, we kind of thought this was going to happen and now it has, but this was the risk plan we had. Would we like to do that now? I find that to be, again, another helpful way to use your risk chart. So we're getting near the end of our time. I'm going to ask if there's any questions. I didn't see any suggestions come into the chat for additional risk list questions. If you have questions now, you can put them in the chat or unmute. While you're doing that, I'll just quickly summarize what we've talked about today. So consider using your risk register to make decisions, to do project planning, to evaluate options that you have, to implement mandates, and to do change management. And use it as an opportunity to gather diverse thoughts and ideas, diversify so that we don't all do groupthink. Use it as an opportunity to gather input. Use it as an opportunity to build trust and maybe preview what's coming so people aren't, caught off guard. Use it as an opportunity to delegate. Again, like, hey, why don't you handle this part of the risk management plan? Use it as an opportunity to manage, I call them politely, incomplete decisions, where somebody's given you a vision, but is not familiar enough with the operational side of things to see how that vision might actually play out. And then you can also use it as a chance to build and present a business case for a change that you would like to see, or an investment that you'd like to see your organization make. I haven't seen any questions come in. Final thoughts, anybody?